Actually, consciously and deliberately recording your learning is, for a lot of people, an unfamiliar process. So here are just some thoughts in a short recording that I hope will be helpful to people who are required, or who, like I did back a long time ago, by their own motivation, feel it's a good idea, irrespective of why they might otherwise have a reason to record learning for CPD, for accreditation purposes, whatever. Anyway, so learning's going on all around us. We learn every day. Yes, we do. We don't always know what it is, but there's a huge amount of learning going on. Capturing it, recognizing it, and of all things, recording it is not an easy thing for a lot of people. That's where the motivation tends to dip. So I'm not going to play about with revealing technique and so on. Here are 4 points to start with. I've only got a short number of slides I'm going to go through, and I'm going to read them out because I'm also doing this as an audio recording. So why bother? What's in it for you? You've got to believe that this is a worthwhile process. And if you can't get to that point, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle to a point where you might actually give up. I know plenty of people that have found this too tough. It's not tough. It is not a difficult thing to do. It's not technically difficult. It's about the will. And if you can't develop and sustain the will, believe there's something worthwhile in this, you're going to make this a very difficult thing to do. And it's going to be something that you do under sufferance. And that's a shame. So try and see something of value. I hope you do. This might help. I want you to get beyond fleeting thoughts. That was a useful thing to think about. I've just learned something there. No, you haven't. You've had a thought. You haven't yet used that thought. That's what learning's about. So get beyond fleeting thoughts and retain real value. Actually think about things you didn't think about previously, that were just thoughts in your head that have flitted from one ear to another and out the other side. And to actually reflect, to review, to dissect, to think about things which you otherwise wouldn't have done, things that might seem common sense, will draw a lot more learning value and will help you to see how best you can record that. So why do we note email addresses, phone numbers, things like that? Because we'll forget them. If we didn't record them, capture them, we didn't write down it somewhere or type up email addresses, phone numbers, directions, postcodes, then our brain's just so full of stuff, we won't be able to access that. Learning's like that. So we need to find a means of capturing and recording learning in the same way as we capture and record other information which hasn't yet turned into learning in our normal everyday work and domestic activities. So the final thing on this slide is it's worth the effort. Don't just make it a chore. It goes back to what I said earlier. If it feels like something you'd rather not do and see no value from, you'll do it maybe, hopes so at least, and you might in doing it find it has value. You didn't recognize it first, but you might just not. You might just think, oh, I've got to do this only because when I get to the end of having to, I'll just drop it like a stone. Well, that can happen, but it is worth the effort. I know, because I've been making that effort for 34 years. Don't make it a chore. Make it something you can enjoy. So what do I say next? Those are just 4 points to kick us off. Let's see what comes next. So recording learning, briefly, my personal journey. After 2 years of gentle nagging by Hugh, who subsequently became my mentor for in excess of 30 years or so, I started recording my learning in the form of a learning log, a template that I was given that I'll show you a bit later, and I'll talk through for the purpose of audio. I started that process in 1987. It took 2 years of gentle nagging by my mentor to get me to the point of actually starting the process, because I wanted to put it off. I was too busy. I didn't see the point, all the reasons that people give when they're at the front end of keeping a record of their own learning. So after 2 years, I started it. Now, more than 34 years later, I've kept a handwritten learning log of 1,847 at the time of saying this entries, around about 1.4 million words, because there's around about, I don't count them, 600 and so words on each A4 sheet. 1,847 entries on the 5th of August 2021, and it amounts to 1.4 or so million words. Sounds a lot. It is a lot, but it wasn't a lot back in 1987, 89, 93, 95. It's become a lot over the 34 years I've kept it going. Over the last 15 months, I've found a different form of recording learning. And I recommend you think about this because it can be a bit of a chore, to use a word I used in a previous slide, to write down your learning. Don't ask me why. I do it by now. It's happening for me. But I do know spend more and more time like this, talking to my computer, recording. This is recording learning in this form. And also in the form of interactive learning conversations where I have recorded conversations with people, typically one at a time, but it needn't be. It could be rather more than one if it suits you. And by articulating, by speaking aloud, by being explicit and exploring in words spoken, rather than just words written down or thoughts of all things, I become more aware of my learning. I can explore my learning interactively. So the point there is that recording learning doesn't have to be a written record. It could be an audio record. It could be a video record. It could be interactive, or you work in solo. And that suits a lot of people better than writing words down on a piece of paper. I also have a YouTube channel, and that's another way to record learning. This recording will go up onto that, for instance. So by whatever means, you're actually, either by your spoken word or your written word or your typed up word, you're capturing, you're recording, you're keeping a record of your learning. It doesn't have to be written. That's the key thing. So my learning log is in a very simple, straightforward form. It's an A4 sheet of paper, and it's broken into a series of bits, parts. It's called a learning log. The significant experience is something that I write up at the top, and that comes after I've written everything, because I don't know what I'm going to write about until I start, and it could be something different than I thought it would. So the significant experience, the headline, is something that I write up last. The first section is what happened. I won't go to this in huge depth. I've done it elsewhere. What happened is a brief summary of what happened, what triggered the learning, a meeting, a conversation, something I read, something I thought about, something I watched, a video, whatever it is, anything that is, this is what triggered it, what happened. Conclusions, mine will start with the word that, this is interesting, that this is new, or that I haven't thought about this, that this is something I need to improve upon, that I'm getting better at this, that so-and-so is worth keeping in touch with. These are all things which go beyond fleeting thoughts. These are all things that by saying or writing them down, I believe, make it more likely they will happen. So that I need to do these things. Actions follow that. Conclusions aren't actions. Conclusions are that statements, that. Conclusions are do this next. As a result of what you've been writing about or talking about, these are things you should do. 3, 4, 5 at most actions at a time, maybe just one. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. But the important thing is, what are you going to do about this? How are you going to show that you've learned something by what you do, your behavior? So actions are about the precise behavioral things that you're going to do as a consequence of reflecting on what it is that you think is a learning experience. And then when? This is not a diary. This is a learning log. It's an action log. So for each of my actions, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, whens. So I have an action, and then I have a linkage to a when. When I next do this. When could be from tomorrow. When could be Thursday when I speak to so-and-so. But it's not just abstract. Sometime in the future. Always. That's rubbish. Try and hang it on something specific. So my learning log is a big beast. It runs to 6 big lever arch files, and it's a bit messy because it's handwritten. It's not intended to look pretty. It's not intended to be assessed or verified by anyone else. It's purely a record of my learning. And I overflow the sections. My conclusions eat into what happened sometimes. My actions overflow into whens, but they're all there. And a lot of my actions are reiterations. Crikey, I reckon I've got some actions I set myself in the 80s. I'm still putting on my learning logs now. So it isn't about making yourself a perfect person. It's making yourself a less imperfect person. And the structure I've just gone through, what happened, conclusions, actions, when, it started to feel a couple of years ago a bit constraining, because there are plenty of times when something happens, that's a learning experience, but I can't bother to write 600 words about it. So these days I also have, as well as my big learning log, I have a sheet which has got 5 boxes on it, 5 sections, equal sized, but I also overflow there, in which I just say, hey, I've just read this, I've just watched this, I've just thought about this. And it's capturing things incidentally, transactionally, which don't warrant the big, heavy duty 600, 650 word treatment, but I don't want to lose. So the key thing is to find a format that suits you as a learner, either speak it out or record it on video or write it up. But if you're going to write it up, then experiment with different ways. There's lots of examples of learning logs and learning templates out there. Most of them are put together well-meaningly by people who don't do it, and they tend to be the complicated ones. Mine are as simple as they can be because I do it and I know what works, and what works is something really simple and straightforward. So don't make it difficult. That's the key thing. So over a long period of time, my learning log has become a big beast. I'm pushing on towards 2,000 sheets. That's a big deal. I'm not getting numbers oriented these days. I just do it when I feel I've got something worth reflecting upon. That means that I do 3 or 4 sheets in a week sometimes, and 3 or 4 sheets in a month other times. It's going with your energy and how you feel about it. It mustn't become a chore. And of course, a lot of my learning logs, by whatever means I record them, be it audio, be it in one written form or another, are not just about looking backward. They're about saying, hey, I've learned this, and when I do this, I hope to show I've learned something. When I do this, do it better. So it's as much looking forward as it is looking back. And that's important too. It's something I mentioned in an earlier recording around learning models, reflecting forward, reflecting in action, reflecting backwards on action. And that's reflected also in my learning log. So there you go. Key message is find a way that suits you. Don't make it a chore, and just go with your own flow and find value in this important process.